Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. It's been quite a while since I last made a video. Gareth's ongoing cancer treatment's making it quite hard to get on with some of the projects we planned, but I couldn't resist when a friend helped me to the Inkle Loom on the side here very recently. Now, there's some unusual things about this and it's a good opportunity to do a little bit of a refurbishment on it. So this loom is quite large. The little one to the side of it is an Ashford Inklet, which a lot of people will be familiar with, just to give you a sense of scale. And you can see that they're quite different styles. That's because the vintage loom behind it is a style that's often called an Old English inkle. Now, this particular one has got something a little bit odd going on with it. Let me just move the Ashford one out of the way. Now, usually with this style of loom, these holes here are used to move pegs up and down to adjust the tension as you weave, except the top peg and the one with the string heddles on, these are glued into place. Now, this clearly worked for whoever originally owned the loom, but I don't think it's going to work for the way I do things. So I'm going to give this a little bit of an overhaul. What we're going to do is drill out those pegs, give it all a clean, rearrange it, rethread it up and see where we go. Now, I mentioned calling this an Old English style of loom. This is based on a very well-known article by a lady called Mary Atwater that was published in 1941, so quite a while now. And at that point, Inkle looms are going through a little bit of a revival. In the 20s and 30s, they start changing shape, and this style, what they call the American style Inkle loom, is being developed, and that's very much the sort of loom that you'll probably get hold of today if you bought an Inkle loom. This sort is a little bit more traditional, and this does bring us on to the old question about, well, where do Inkle looms come into things? Because whilst the braid itself, an inkle just means a narrow braid, whilst the braid itself can be done on a backstrap loom, on a small rigid heddle, on a braid loom like this, the braids themselves go back, well, almost as long as we have evidence for narrow weaving in all sorts of forms. The actual looms are a little bit harder to trace, and it's always been one of the problems with reenactment groups that a lot of people want to use an Inkle loom, but quite often the style of loom they've got available isn't appropriate for them. In a moment I'll take this into the workshop, but we'll just have another little look at what we've got here. So we have two side uprights, one centre upright, and at the moment these have got these rather pesky glued in pegs. Interestingly, this top one is a much more refined peg. You see, it's got a bit of shaping, so I don't know whether that's been inherited from something else or it was what they intended to do originally, but the rest didn't quite happen. It's clearly a homemade loom, nicely done, but nothing that special. These ones all come out with a bit of a wiggle, one-handed as usual. So I'm going to need to sort out some more of these for the centre sections as well. And the heddles, well, they're quite nicely made string heddles, but can you see how the original owners actually split a peg and has permanently attached the heddles into there? If I can get this out without destroying those, well, it might be quite nice to give them a whirl and use the heddles that the original person set up, but I don't know whether we're going to be able to because there's a lot of glue there. So I think my first job is going to be to take a chisel to this and then give it a really good whack and see if it comes out. If not, I'm going to have to drill it. Well, a good whack did get this out without me having to destroy that. That sounds good. Unfortunately, the knot here cracked a bit off. So what I need to do before I do anything else, load this full of glue, clamp it back together again, give that a chance to set up because I don't want to lose any strength from this section. So a really good squeeze of Gorilla Glue. It's squeezing out the sides at the moment because I really want to get that deep into the join. I'll wipe that down, we'll put a clamp on it and see how we get on. So the glue's set overnight. This can come off now. There we are. That's nice and firm. I think I will still put a reinforcing bar along the edge. But before I do anything else, I really need to put a very basic warp on this and just see how everything lines up. And to do that, I'm going to need to clean this up. This is the heddle rod that came with it, with the pre-attached heddles. Now, I suspect they're going to turn out not to be the right length for the rejig, but to give it a fair try, all this old glue's got to come off. So I'm going to take it into the workshop, sand that off, and then put a really basic string warp on, just to get a sense of how long it's going to be and what else needs changing. So there's no doubt there's some work to be done on this. This upright's got a crack as well. Again, can be glued, clamped, reinforced. And I'm just going to try winding a very straightforward warp round just to see how everything lines up. Now, I was talking to some friends online on one of the Inkle weaving groups about this, and they quite rightly pulled me up on calling it an Old English style. I can't help referring to that, though. Strictly speaking, the Old English style is a floor loom, like a surviving example from the late 17th century up in Scotland. But I think whoever made this very much had that picture in front of them when they were working, and somebody referred to this as being a kindly woodworker style of loom, which I loved. It's that idea that somebody was given a picture from a book or a magazine, didn't really understand how the loom worked, but said, yes, of course I can make that for you. Now, this isn't a very tidy warp. All I'm trying to do is find out where the bits need to go to make this work. So usually the heddle loops would pull these down into place, and I think those are definitely too long as they stand. It might work on this one. Oops, that's going to need to go there. That's need to go there. And then the idea is you can move the threads up and down accordingly. I don't think this one's going to work. I think this needs to be completely done away with. And we need to start again with one of the spare pegs, which we do have one. And yeah, I need to have a little think about that, don't I? No, that has to go underneath that. So that's only going to work there. And that should be brought down to the same length. That might work. I might do even better further down again. Wiggle. No, that joint's broken up again as well. In which case, if that is the case, oh, we might get away with the original heddles if we put them in that hole. Okay, right, so we could have a go with this. That might just about do. The downside to fixed heddles is that rather than winding up the entire thing as I just have and then attaching the heddles one at a time as you set up the shed, one top thread, one bottom thread, one top thread, one bottom thread, I'm going to have to run them all through the heddles as I go. This peg is providing the tension. So you start off with the warp running over that, and then as you weave it gets tighter, so eventually this one has to come out, and that one's stuck quite hard. That's right, a little tap will bring that out. I think I'm going to need another hole here as well. Right, so what I can usefully do at the moment is measure the existing warp. Well, that's 1.5 meters, 59 to there. Another 30, so 180 centimetres. That's quite useful, and of course I could create more length by taking the warp around extra pegs. Okay, take this off, take that out. Reglue, reinforce this. I definitely need to do that. Reinforce that. Definitely need to do that. Drill another hole there. We'll see how we get on. So compare this loom, the one from the article of 1941, to this one, which is in the collections of the National Museum of Scotland, and it's actually dated 1688. So it's late 17th century. I think it's the oldest one that I'm currently aware of. This is a floor standing one, very, very definitely. And then compare that one to this early 20th century one, which was used in a school. These last two are in this book, Scottish Spinning Schools. And then have a little look at mine, which, yes, it's a tabletop loom. This is why I've been calling it an Old English style. I think that's the sort of picture they were looking at when they made it. So I decided this loom is never going to be pretty, so I'm not going to worry too much about how pretty it looks when I mend it. So I'm using some lolly sticks, absolutely plastered in glue. I really don't mind. I'm going to reinforce the slightly cracked areas, and then I'm going to use some panel pins to tack them into place to take the strain when they're dry. And I don't want to do too much fancying around with this until I've worked out exactly how to get it behaving when I warp it up. So I might have more reinforcement yet to go. This is not pretty, really don't care. And is that the right size bit? Pretty much. I think another hole round about there. We'll try one round about there. And we finally got a proper test warp on it. Now, ironically, the heddle rod ended up in the same hole that we took it out of originally, but I'm not going to be leaving it there long term. So this is a very, very simple, very chunky warp that I've got on there. And I've put some extra pegs in to give me that little bit of tension that I need. Now, most of you are probably very familiar with how inkle weaving works. The heddles, there we are, allow me to raise and lower a set of threads. So if I push down, you can see that that single red thread comes to the top. If I lift up, all the white threads come to the top. Now this is a really chunky thread. This is actually a crochet cotton, more like a knitting cotton, and I haven't beaten it back down terribly firmly, so I've got quite a chunky braid here, but that's fine. That's giving me a chance to see how this works. And the good news is that this loom, for all its little weirdnesses, does work, but it is limited. Having to keep the heddle here to give me that distance, that's a huge waste of space. So I think this can be better used for something else. I'm going to finish this braid, then I'm going to rewarp it, not with string heddles, but with probably a little rigid heddle. And I think I can get an awful lot more warp on this for a better use of space. Well, I finished that little braid and I'm quite pleased with how it came out. I wasn't trying very hard with it, but we still got a length that's quite acceptable as a belt on a child's costume. So that initial setup as an inkle loom certainly works, but I found a way to use it that's much better for the way that I do things. So you can see here that I've used the pegs to allow for a much wider warp, and rather than using heddle loops, I've gone for, oops, me treading on paper there, I've gone for a simple rigid heddle. So that allows me to raise and lower the shed to make a plain weave. Now I've set this up with a much, much longer belt length, the length that I'd normally use for an adult, and that's going to work absolutely fine. Now this little paper twist here, you may have noticed, that's a little cheat to help me keep the width even as I weave. I can slide that up and just check that I'm not pulling in too much as I go. So there are definitely still some issues here. This bar, I don't know if you can see, tips very slightly upwards. That's not ideal. On a really detailed piece, that can make your work curve. But then at the moment, all of these pegs are at slightly wonky angles, so I'm not too worried about that for starters. What I do like about this is a big enough loom to take a really long belt length. There's a good couple of meters on there, probably a bit more. But sitting on the sofa next to me or on a stool in front of me is a nice working height. So, yes, it is an example of the kindly woodworker in action. Somebody started with an image of a historic type of loom. Tried to convert it to a tabletop version. Got sort of alright, not too terribly. It's come to me after quite a lot of years. It's got cracks and bumps and wiggles. I might give it a paint job. I'm thinking pale green, and then along the bottom here I might put in some little nettle leaves and flax and some little sheep. I've got some line drawings I did for a project a while ago that I could convert for that. That might be quite fun. But for now, that's been a nice project. It's distracted me, kept me out of mischief while we've been waiting for different hospital appointments and phone backs and things. And certainly as an alternative to trying to use a backstrap method in the living room on a long walk when I'm up and down like a yo-yo at the moment, I'm quite pleased with that. So there should be more videos before too long. Do bear with me. As I said, life is a little chaotic at the moment. I'll try and get out for some hedge mothering as well before too long. Till then, happy crafting and enjoy being snuggled in, hibernating over the winter months.